She showed up early. That's just how she was raised. Blazer pressed, notebook in hand, hair in a neat bun. No jewelry except a small gold cross. Her name was Maya Daniels, and today was her first day as Director of Strategy at Fortbridge Financial. But the moment she stepped into the boardroom, the energy shifted. The room went silent not out of respect, but confusion. One man, Peter, leaned over to another and whispered, "She's early for the intern orientation." Another chimed in, "HR must have sent her to the wrong floor." Maya heard them. Of course she did, but she didn't flinch. She just walked calmly to the front of the room and placed her folder on the head of the table, the seat reserved for the director. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Peter said, chuckling as he stood. "That's for the director. You can take the notes from over there." Maya looked up at him not with anger, but with a quiet command. "Am the director," she said. "And I believe you're in my seat." The room froze. For 10 seconds, no one said a word. Then someone laughed. Nervous. "You're joking." "Right." But she wasn't, because what they didn't know was that Maya wasn't just here on merit. She had rewritten the recovery plan that saved Fortbridge after the last market crash. She had already advised Fortune 500 CEOs. And now, she was their boss. And suddenly, everyone at the table had forgotten how to speak. Maya Daniels had worked too hard and climbed too far to be mistaken for someone fetching coffee. She was 30, a single mom to a bright, curious 8-year-old named Zoe, and she had built her career on long nights and quiet excellence. Maya didn't come from privilege, she came from persistence. She was raised by her grandmother in a 1-bedroom apartment in Newark, and by the time she was 10, she already understood the weight of silence in rooms where people didn't expect her to speak. By 23, she had landed her first analyst job at a regional bank. She wasn't the loudest. She wasn't flashy. But she was precise. And she had a gift for finding patterns in numbers that others overlooked. When the housing market trembled in 2008, Maya predicted the downturn in a report no one read until it was too late. That report would resurface years later when it became the blueprint for an internal reform. But Maya, she got no credit. She never asked for it. By 30, she'd been passed over for promotion 3 times, each time for someone who fit the culture better. One of them had once asked her to train him on pivot tables. But Maya didn't get bitter. She got sharper. She enrolled in night classes, finished her MBA while working full-time, and quietly developed a reputation in the industry as the one you called when you wanted a sinking portfolio turned around. She was the architect behind a major client retention strategy that saved a top firm from collapse, and that's when Fortbridge Bank came calling. Fortbridge wasn't just any bank. It was old, established, elite. Its boardroom walls were lined with oil portraits of men whose last names now lived on as financial subsidiaries. It had the kind of culture that was polished on the outside and cold on the inside. And its leadership nearly all white, nearly all male. Maya would be one of only 3 women at the executive level, and the only black one. She didn't flinch. When the offer came to lead strategic operations, Maya accepted, and on the first day, she wore her best navy blue blazer, a soft ivory blouse, black slacks, and the same sensible heels she wore in every important meeting. Her bag was structured, her phone charged, and her mind focused. She dropped Zoe off at school, kissed her forehead, and said, "Today's a big day. Baby, I'm gonna show you what strong looks like." But the moment she stepped into Fortbridge Tower, it began. The security guard didn't ask for ID. He asked who she was there to see. The receptionist handed her an intern badge without looking up. When she corrected her, the woman blinked twice, then said, "Oh, my mistake. I thought you were here for the internship program." As Maya waited for the elevator, 2 employees walked past, whispering and laughing. One said, "Damn, they're starting interns early this year." She said nothing. On the executive floor, the assistant outside the conference room looked up from her laptop and said, "Sorry, the service staff uses the other entrance. I'm the new director," Maya replied evenly. The assistant's face flushed. "Oh, sorry. I didn't realize." "I know," Maya said, walking past. Inside the boardroom, it was worse. The air was sharp with cologne and quiet authority. 10 men in suits sat around a gleaming table, and 1 woman. They looked up as Maya entered, and for a moment, no one moved. Then someone. Peter Langston stood, extended his hand with a smirk, and said, "You must be shadowing today." Maya smiled politely and shook his hand. "No, I'm leading." He blinked. "You're the new director, Maya Daniels." Another executive coughed into his fist, and a low, awkward shuffle moved through the room as chairs slid and backs straightened. The woman in the room gave a quick nod, respectful, but cautious. She knew how this game worked. As the meeting began, Maya noticed something else. Her name wasn't on the printed agenda. Her section of the presentation had been shortened, and when she began to speak, no one took notes. They nodded vaguely, checked their phones, and moved on as if she'd never spoken at all. That was her welcome. Over the next few days, the pattern deepened. Emails were sent about adjusting Maya's responsibilities to align with the team's culture. A colleague tried to walk her through how things are done around here, like she hadn't led more teams than he'd ever managed. At lunch, she wasn't invited to join the others. The one time she sat in the cafeteria, someone asked if she was with HR. In one hallway encounter, a junior associate who didn't recognize her asked if she was the temp filling in for the receptionist. She corrected him. He laughed. "Seriously?" "Yes, seriously." But Maya didn't explode. She documented. She listened, observed, and started building. Behind the scenes, she began drafting a new operational blueprint for the bank's digital strategy, a system overhaul that would save millions annually and reposition Fortbridge in a rapidly changing financial landscape. She met quietly with department heads. She built trust, not by demanding it, but by delivering. Her numbers spoke louder than assumptions ever could, but she also noticed what others chose not to. She noticed how her emails were forwarded with edits before reaching the board. She noticed how her tone was policed. Maybe soften this. It sounds a little direct. She noticed how her leadership was rebranded as aggressive, while Peter's interruptions were passionate. And she kept hearing it again and again. "You don't look like what I expected from a director." One afternoon, during a client call, Maya introduced herself. The man on the other end said, "Oh, I thought you'd be someone else. You sound so polished. Where are you from originally?" Maya paused. "New Jersey." The silence that followed said everything. Still, she kept moving, not because she was unbothered, but because she had learned a long time ago that in rooms like this, you don't rise by demanding space. You rise by making your presence undeniable. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to change the game. And the moment was coming faster than anyone in that room expected, when Maya would no longer be mistaken for anything other than exactly who she was. Not an intern, not an assistant, not someone in need of a mentor, but the woman at the head of the table with the strategy, the vision, and the receipts to back it all up. By the third week, Maya had already learned the rhythm of the office and the rhythm of how she was excluded. At Fortbridge, leadership meetings didn't begin with words. They began with glances. Glances that confirmed who mattered, whose voices were welcomed, and who was just there to fill a quota. She was in the room, but she wasn't in the room. Her insights were either met with polite nods or redirected mid-sentence. One time, after laying out a compelling data point on declining portfolio performance, a male executive said, "Let's see what Peter thinks. He's been here longer." The irony, Peter's department was the one underperforming. Then came the moment that stung in a different way. Maya walked into a strategy session, one she was supposed to lead, and found her chair already taken. Peter had started presenting early. Her name wasn't even on the meeting slide deck. Instead, it read, "Strategic Revision Framework, presented by Peter Langston." Maya didn't interrupt. She took a seat at the end of the table and listened. Slide after slide, Peter outlined a plan. It was the exact framework she'd developed over nights at her dining table, after Zoe had gone to sleep. The naming conventions, the risk charts, even the summary language word for word. He hadn't even changed the title of the last section, 5 Levers of Retention Control. That phrase wasn't common. It was hers. She'd coined it. Someone had clearly accessed her shared drive, and someone had hit copy. She sat in silence while others in the room nodded, impressed. When he finished, the room clapped lightly. Peter gave a modest shrug like he was too humble to take credit, but accepted it anyway. Then the senior VP said, "This is the most coherent strategy I've seen all quarter. We need to present this to the board." Peter smiled, glancing briefly at Maya, but said nothing. Later that afternoon, Peter stopped by her office, leaned on the doorframe with false familiarity. "I figured it was all hands on deck," he said casually. "Didn't want to waste time waiting for your version. Hope that's cool." Maya looked up from her computer, calm, unshaken. "I'd already sent my version to the board's inbox at 5:14 this morning," she said. Peter's smile twitched. "I CC'd senior leadership," she added, "with version history attached." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Maya didn't look away. "I'd prefer not to be plagiarized again," she said. "I assume we won't have to repeat this conversation." Peter turned and left without a word. But the tension didn't leave with him. By the end of the week, whispers were circulating. Maya had gone from being underestimated to being watched. And not in a good way. In meetings, her every word was dissected. Her tone was critiqued. A bit sharp, someone said. "Can come off intense," another noted. She'd speak with the same firmness Peter used, but when he did it, it was called leadership. When she did it, it was aggressive. During a Monday budget review, Maya offered a direct correction to a misreported figure. The room went cold. Afterward, a colleague pulled her aside and said, "You know, Maya, sometimes it helps to be a little less pointed." She nodded politely, then walked away. What they didn't know was that Maya had begun documenting every comment, every misstep, every accidental omission. She wasn't preparing for war. She was building clarity. Because the time for patience was over. The quarterly board review was approaching. a presentation that shaped strategic direction and defined future leadership roles. For weeks, Maya had been preparing her team's report, aligning projections with market volatility trends, incorporating digital migration forecasts, and proposing a major pivot that could future-proof Fortbridge's operations. It was airtight. She knew it. But 2 days before the review, she received an email from Peter's assistant. "Hi, Maya. Per Peter's request, your section will be presented by him on your behalf. Let us know if you'd like a seat reserved." She didn't reply. Instead, she printed every page of her original strategy, bound it neatly, and addressed copies to each member of the board. She hand-delivered them to the executive mailroom that same afternoon with a timestamp. Then, she showed up to the meeting, not as a passive observer, but as the author of what they were about to see. The conference room was buzzing as executives filtered in, adjusting ties, checking watches. Peter stood near the front, confident, laughing with 2 board members like he already had the promotion in his pocket. When the meeting began, he stepped up with his usual grin. "Good morning," he said. "I'll be walking us through our revised strategy for Q4 performance." He clicked to the first slide. Familiar colors, familiar framework. Maya's work. As Peter launched into the opening metrics, something shifted in the air. About 2 minutes in, one of the senior board members raised a hand. "Sorry to interrupt." "Peter," he said, "but this report, this is the same one Maya Daniels sent us yesterday morning." "Yes." Peter froze. The room quieted. Another member flipped through his printed copy. "Yes, this section, 5 levers of retention control. It's her exact language." Peter tried to recover. "Right. I was just expanding on..." But the chairman cut him off. "Peter, you had 0 contribution listed in the document's metadata. Maya submitted the version history. The report is hers." All eyes turned. Slowly, heads shifted toward Maya, seated at the side of the room, hands folded, expression calm. The chairman turned to her directly. "Maya, would you mind walking us through your projections?" We stood without hesitation, walked to the front, and began presenting. No hesitation, no script, just facts, vision, precision. By the time she finished, no one had questions, only applause. Peter sat still, his jaw tight, staring at the table, and for the first time since she'd joined Fortbridge, Maya didn't feel invisible. She felt inevitable. That day changed everything. The dynamic, the tone, the way people looked at her in the halls. But more importantly, it changed how she looked at herself. Because Maya didn't just survive the dismissal, the condescension, or the theft of her work. She turned it into power, not by yelling, not by begging, but by being undeniable. The moment Maya finished her presentation, the room didn't just applaud. They leaned in. Board members asked thoughtful questions. One complimented her projections as forward-thinking. Another noted that her retention strategy could be modeled across other divisions. And when the meeting ended, instead of slipping out unnoticed, like she had in the past, Maya was surrounded by people eager to shake her hand. Peter, he was nowhere to be found. By the end of the day, a formal memo was sent from the chairman's office, effective immediately. All departmental strategies must be attributed with source authorship. Misrepresentation will be grounds for reassignment. That word, reassignment, was intentional. 2 weeks later, Peter was quietly moved out of the strategy division and into a compliance restructuring role with no direct reports. He wasn't fired, not officially, But the message was clear, and the message rippled. Maya noticed the shift almost instantly. The same colleagues who once ignored her now asked for her insight. Emails that used to start with quick question and end with a request to look this over for me began arriving with subject lines like, "Requesting your guidance." People stood when she entered the room. Some tried too hard, adding Ms. Daniels to every sentence like they'd just learned how to say her name. She didn't need fanfare. What she wanted was something much deeper space to lead on her own terms. And for the first time, she had it. But that didn't mean she forgot. Maya remembered every moment she'd been looked over, every time her ideas were attributed to someone else. Every raised eyebrow, every fake smile. And while revenge was never her style, accountability absolutely was. So she used her new influence with precision. When the HR department began an internal review of employee satisfaction, Maya suggested they add an anonymous bias and belonging metric. That led to data they couldn't ignore. Employees of color reported feeling half as likely to be recognized as leadership material. Maya didn't just flag the problem. She proposed a solution. She developed a mentorship program across departments, pairing emerging talent, especially women, and employees of color with senior leadership for 6-month rotations. She offered to lead the pilot phase herself. Then came the invitation she didn't expect. The chairman asked her to join a closed-door executive planning retreat, the same retreat she hadn't been invited to earlier that year. This time, her seat wasn't a courtesy. It was earned. At the retreat, she shared a quiet truth. "We have a culture of polished exclusion," she said. "We pride ourselves on professionalism, but we mistake sameness for safety, and that's why we're bleeding talent we never even noticed." The room was silent, but no one challenged her, because she was right, and because she had the receipts to prove it. Still, perhaps the most unexpected moment came from someone Maya never thought she'd hear from again: Jessica. Jessica was the assistant who once assumed Maya was part of the service staff. She had avoided eye contact for weeks after that mistake, never offering an apology. But one afternoon, Maya received a message. "Hi, Ms. Daniels. I know this might be odd, but I was wondering if I could schedule time to learn more about your work. I'm trying to grow, and I'd be honored to hear how you got here." Maya stared at the message. Part of her wanted to delete it. Another part remembered what it was like to walk through rooms where no one looked like her. So she replied, "Yes, let's talk next Thursday. Because sometimes leadership isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about lifting the ceiling so that the next woman who walks in doesn't have to duck." Maya didn't plan to become the face of a new movement inside Fortbridge, but that's exactly what happened. The whispers about her being just an intern faded. Now, people whispered something else entirely. She changed everything. Later that evening, long after the offices at Fortbridge had emptied and the sun dipped behind the skyline, Maya sat at her desk, staring at a small photo frame. It was Zoe, smiling wide, missing a front tooth, wearing a homemade crown of glitter and cardboard. Next to it was a crayon drawing a stick figure with a briefcase and a speech bubble that read, "My mommy is the boss." Maya smiled. She remembered the night Zoe had drawn that picture. It was after Maya had come home late from work, exhausted, doubting herself after yet another meeting where her voice was sidelined. She had slumped on the couch, barely holding it together, and little Zoe had placed the drawing in her lap and said, "You're gonna be the boss. Right, Mommy? Even if they don't see it yet. Even if they don't see it yet." Maya hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be invisible, To walk into rooms and be mistaken for someone's assistant. To be praised only after someone else repeated her idea. To be told to wait her turn by people who'd never earned theirs. But she also hadn't forgotten the women who came before her, the ones who never got the title, but paved the path anyway. The black teachers, the nannies, the clerks, the church secretaries who ran entire communities without ever being called leaders. Maya knew she stood on their shoulders. And now, she was becoming a shoulder, too. Because leadership isn't just about having the title. It's about what you do with it once the door finally opens. It's about reaching back and pulling someone else forward. It's about speaking up when it would be easier to stay silent. And it's about never letting someone else define your worth just because they don't know where to place you. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't rage or retaliation. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is presence, unapologetic, unshakable, unmistakably earned. So, if you've ever walked into a room and felt overlooked, if you've ever been called the intern, the assistant, or the diversity hire, when you were more qualified than anyone there, this story is for you. Not to make you bitter, but to make you clear. Clear on who you are. Clear on what you carry. Clear on how far you've come, even when nobody clapped for you. Maya didn't raise her voice to get noticed. She raised her standard, and eventually, the room had to rise to meet her. Because power doesn't always look like what people expect. Sometimes, it wears quiet confidence, natural hair, a blazer from a black-owned boutique, and a name they'll remember, long after they forget what they called you at first. So keep walking into the room, even if they don't see it yet. They will.